Good afternoon, and thank you all for watching. I want to talk with you today about surprise in communication, to call your attention to how important surprise in communication is, and also to explore a bit what poetry and maybe arts in general can teach us about how to deal with surprise. Communication is a struggle between expectations and surprises. When you say something to someone, you expect them to interpret your words in a certain way. And when you listen to someone, you expect them to say things in a certain way. But these expectations often fail. Sometimes we get surprised by what people say, and sometimes we get surprised by how people react to what we say. To be surprised is to suffer the impact of a break of expectation. This can be good when a surprise is exciting. Curiosity, discovery, creativity are all related to what surprises us. But surprise can also frustrate our plans, make us feel shocked, threatened, or simply misunderstood. Surprise indicates that our expectations were wrong, that our picture of the world was incomplete. Expectations and surprises have a deep root in the functioning of our minds. Our minds are predictive mechanisms, always looking for patterns, trying to anticipate what's going to happen. But surprise is not simply a mistake of anticipation, it's also a necessity. We need surprise in communication. The whole point of listening to what people have to say is that we cannot know them in advance. Without surprising each other, we cannot really connect. We just conversate with the mirror of our own expectations. What we want in communication is to surprise other people and to be surprised by them. And yet, we often don't deal very well with surprise. We feel negative towards unpredictability, towards words and behaviors that are unfamiliar to us. That which we cannot predict could potentially harm us. Our bodies are attentive to that. That's why when we get surprised, we get this rush. Our hearts accelerate, our alertness is increased, our muscles get ready to fight or flight. One of the problems we have in communication, both in our personal lives and as societies, is our tendency to shut down surprise, to try to fit communication into the patterns that we already know. It's really hard to not impose our assumptions and expectations when communicate. We don't even notice that we are doing that. But suppressing surprise is not a good way to deal with it because it means also shutting down difference, novelty, potential uniqueness. We live in a complex reality and we share it with complex people. And complexity here means that our systems of predictability are doomed to fail. Meanings are just not stable. We spend a lot of energy trying to refine our tools for predicting situations and people, making meanings stable. And I think we should accept that they are not and learn how to deal with it. We should learn how to accept surprise, stay with it, and use it to connect to what is unique, unpredictable about different people. Literature and arts have an important role to play in this. My bachelor was in arts, which means that I spent some years of my life dealing with communicative situations that were very challenging, sometimes difficult to understand. Many people imagine that what you learn in art university is how to explain art, how to fit artworks into expected patterns. And yes, we do that as well. But the most valuable and also the hardest lesson is to learn how to accept surprise, grasp it, explore it, but without destroying it. Aesthetic experiences that are challenging train us to deal with surprise. They give us practical experience, not just theories, on how to recognize surprise, accept it, stay with it, and use its power for making connections. Artistic communication is our model here. But I don't want to be talking today about artworks in museums or books in libraries. I want to bring this discussion closer to everyday practical life. I want to call attention to everyday creativity in the use of language, an almost artistic kind of creativity. I'm talking about invention of language. We don't normally think of ourselves, of course, as inventors of language. We think of writers, poets as such. But every day, in almost everything we do, we have to transform how we use language beyond our learned patterns and expectations in order to be able to think together with other people. Think of a group of people. It has a language of its own. Whether you're chatting with an old friend or whether you're chatting with someone you just met, language just works differently. It has different capabilities, and this transforms what we can think together and experience together. A good example is how couples often have their own language. They invent meanings for specific expressions, phrases, symbols, invent ways of articulating emotions, ways of speaking to each other that are unique, deeply integrated. We adapt our use of language to the specific dialogues and conversations that we have. When a new group forms, it gradually develops a form of thinking, of seeing the world through the perspective of that group. And this process comes together with a transformation of language. People in the group change the frequency of use of some words. They learn new vocabulary. They twist dictionary meanings and become attentive to particular subtleties of interpretation and expression. They craft literary figures like metaphors or paradoxes. They even invent new words. This is what I mean by invention of language. When I say that we think together and have experiences together, I mean that in a radical way. Not in the sense of I think for myself and you think for yourselves, and then we exchange the products of our individual thoughts. No, it's more integrated than that. What I'm saying is that by communicating, we assemble shared systems for thinking and even feeling, a shared mind, so to speak. And this shared mind produces its own thoughts that me and you on our own wouldn't be able to produce. How do we assemble these shared minds? It is not just by exchanging what we thought individually. We assemble shared minds by inventing language, inventing new patterns of communication with which we can collectively think new thoughts. Surprise is central in this process. This invention of language is produced through surprises, aha moments in communication, discoveries, breakthroughs that come from having our expectations challenged and accept the challenge. Inventing new patterns of language through surprise is what separates assembling shared minds unique and making unique connections from just exchanging previously thought ideas. Our groups of friends, our families, our teams, they are each like an invented piece of language. If all the utterances of these groups were to be recorded, they would each read like a unique book with its own literary style, unique vocabulary, and special twists of meaning. I like to think of the creative language of these shared minds as poems. But you may object. A poem is the individual expression of a poet. It is not a group conversation. Well, the kind of poetry that I have in mind is not the lyrical poetry composed in solitude, but an improvised poetry, sung or spoken, composed on the spot and in dialogue, such as in a rap battle. This is oral poetry improvisation, a global phenomenon that takes different forms in various cultures. It is not composed in solitude, but improvised in a social gathering and in dialogue with another poet and with the audience. Consider, for example, repente, a tradition of sung improvised poetry challenges from the northeast of Brazil. In a repente performance, there are two poets, each with their guitars, and they take turns improvising regular verses in a competitive poetic dialogue that develops something. Repente is poetry in the form of a conversation, or conversation in the form of poetry. The poets discuss many topics: politics, history, religion, customs, and traditions. But this is a strange kind of conversation. You have to discuss in verses. The verses need to be metrified, to rhyme, and to be composed on the spot. And also, they need to impress the audience and the judges, to display creative twists and associations, inspiring metaphors, unusual solutions for a certain topic. They need to be surprising. The constraints on the use of language in the conversations make it so that the poet is forced to change the meanings and the words and to come up with new ways of expressing things, always in dialogue with the other poet and with the audience. The music played by the guitars, as well as the musicality of the poetic meters, organize the flow of the conversation. It is in these organized rhythms, in the give and take of the dialogue, the coming and going of the verse lines, the A's and B's of the rhyme patterns. It is in these organized rhythms that language is mixed up, shaken, twisted, and made to behave in innovative, creative, surprising ways. This strange conversation is not something of a completely different nature than what we do every day. The conversation is strange in repente because it exaggerates some inventive aspects of communication. It makes the surprise aspect of communication very easy to spot. But this aspect is also present in everyday life. In the conversations that we have, we also have to transform how the words and phrases act in response to each other and how they are organized by their own rhythms. We have to take the static words from the dictionary and synchronize their rhythms between us through anticipations and surprises. The point of comparing conversations to improvised poems is that it makes us think of everyday communication also in terms of aesthetic experiences oriented towards surprise. What are the implications of doing that? Let me point out one implication. We have some responsibilities in communication. For example, to tell the truth, to be clear, to mind other people's intentions and feelings, to search for common ground. But this is not all. If conversations are like improvised poems, we also have a responsibility of respecting surprise and creativity when we communicate with others. Sharing creative agency with the interlocutor. Our search for stability and predictability sometimes blinds us to this responsibility, to the unique creative connections that we can make with people around us. Again, we can use repente as a model here. In repente, the rules of the competition make it so that poets have to keep a rhythm of surprises going forward, bringing surprise back again and again. They have to keep the flow of improvisation. Repente is like a factory for creative conversations, and that's why we are able to admire the talent and the ability of these poets, because the shared mind that they assemble together shares creative agency and respects surprise. We should learn to balance our necessity for predictability with a respect for surprise. And we should learn to view surprise not as a threat to communication, but as a way itself of building connections through inventions of language. When we consider good models for our everyday conversations, we should think not only of diplomatic negotiations which try to find a common ground, or philosophical debate which works towards clarity and coherence, but also poems shared, improvised poems which work towards surprise. Here are some take-home messages. First of all, communication can be seen as a struggle between expectations and surprises. And in order to connect with other people and to learn from them, we need surprise. We need to recognize surprises, stay with them, and share creativity with our interlocutors. Aesthetic experiences that are challenging, such as in arts and literature, can train us to accept surprise, stay with it, and use its power for making connections. And finally, our everyday conversations and our social groups can be compared to improvised poems, language inventions that connect people, assemble shared minds through surprise. Thank you.